Hey there, my name is ZW Buckley, and welcome to a new episode of EQ&A, my series where I answer your biggest music questions and help you balance out your music production skills. If you have a music question that you'd like me to answer in next month's episode of EQ&A, all you have to do is reply to the pinned comment below this video with your question. A new episode of EQ&A will premiere on the final Friday of every month, so make sure that you're subscribed, and if you want to be notified when it comes out, click the little bell icon. Let's jump into today's episode. Hey y'all, welcome back to a new episode of EQ&A. This is our fourth episode for November 2025. I know it's funny, I'm in a different position. Usually for this series, I make a strong effort to be over back there in the corner of my studio to change it up. But all of today's questions, for the most part, really involved an answer being in the DAW. So here I am at my desk. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so our first question for today's episode is from Jabstep5739. What's up, ZW? Congrats on all the success. It's great to see how much your channel has grown. How would you recommend learning an instrument, in parentheses, piano, and learning Ableton and implementing them both as a beginner? My ultimate goal is to become a composer, and I believe it will help me in the long run. So I would start first with piano by learning to play songs that you really love and that you would enjoy playing. You want to incentivize yourself because learning an instrument is hard. It's going to feel frustrating at first, but the payoff is always worth it. Then, once you've learned a song that you enjoy, learn how to record it in Ableton Live. Then, once you've recorded your performance in Ableton Live, try to add some other instruments. If you've recorded piano, how can you add drums? And then from there, learn how to mix and to master that recording. And repeat this process over and over again. One of the biggest pitfalls when learning production for the first time is starting down a path that you don't need to quite yet. So I would allow your learning to be guided by your needs. I would say practice and take your time. One of the most important music teachers in my life told me that you practice slow to play fast. And I think that that's true even with a career, becoming a composer, right? Learn slow to go fast. Take your time. You're going to get where you want to go much sooner than if you try to rush. Our next question comes from Enchanter Thatum, or I hope it's Enchanter the Tim. I think that's great. But Enchanter the Tim asks, how do I build a track starting with a melody and harmonizing with chords? I always end up changing my melody to match my chords, and it ends up sounding a bit bland. I'd like to make music like Tennyson or Rat-a-tat, melody forward. So the way that I approach this is I look at the notes in every measure, and I see what triads emerge. And then from there, my brain starts to think in terms of substitutions. But let's see what triads kind of pop out here. So I've got a second track here that I can start to build a pad upon, and I'm going to do that. Let's just get a note in here. Great, perfect. So we can use our melody to start guiding our chords for us. So I see C, E, B, C, D, B. So C and E have a relationship of a third, right? I could easily start this as a C major chord, and I could go through for the same other measures. So F and A, we could easily either do an F major chord or we could do a D minor chord. But I'm going to go ahead and just start plugging these in. I'll plug them in down here. I may need to raise it up an octave so that they overlap, but we'll play with it. So let's just kind of go for the more obvious, like major progression approach first. And then I'm going to talk about spicing it up. That's a pretty square chord progression. I would not use it, but maybe this is the step that you get stuck at. But something to think about is extensions. And it can be really helpful to think of your melody as extensions on a chord as opposed to necessarily the chord itself. So for example, I could say, put this first chord, instead of being a C major, let's go with something a bit more complex, like an A minor 7. And similarly for this F major chord, I could easily think about this as the 5th and the 7th in a B flat major chord. So I'm going to add that B flat, and we'll switch to viewing in flats here. There we go. and then add a D. And I can leave that C if I want a ninth, or I can get rid of it. For now, I'm going to get rid of it. And then similarly here, we've got the C, the E, and the B. Now I could go back to the A, or I could kind of do some like rising chord progression sort of thing here and leave this with the C, which would be totally fine if I wanted to. In fact, we can go with the C major 7th since we've got the B natural in here. That might feel pretty spicy going from a B flat to a C major 7, but this experimentation is part of the process. And then let's stick with the theme here, and let's treat this F and the A as the 3rd and the 5th of a D minor 7 chord, and that E would finish as a 9th. Now let's hear how this sounds. This is just kind of going off of head knowledge, but then I can adjust from there. And honestly, that sounds really nice. I would just keep tweaking it if I needed to. I could add further extensions, I could play with the octaves, or I could invert the chords from there. But just having triads as a starting point, I find is immensely helpful to then begin to orient yourself around writing a chord progression that fits your melody, even if your melody doesn't make the chords obvious at first glance. So our next question comes from Jesse Snyder Composer, who asks, love these EQ&A series, as much life advice as they are music advice. Really appreciate how thoughtful your answers are. My question, which kind of piggybacks off the last question in this video, do you have any tips for diving deep on the micro for various genres? For example, I want to expand my knowledge of orchestration and traditional scoring, but all the various terms and articulations in history feels overwhelming to dig into. So an easy way to approach this question, I think, is when you think about a genre that you want to learn, what are like the most ubiquitous artists in that genre? Then study what they're doing. Learn the details of what they are doing. Because if they are so successful at that genre that people think of their names synonymously with that style of music, then chances are the micro is hidden in the work that they are doing. And I think that can be true with something even like orchestration and traditional scoring. I think it's important to know enough culturally about what kind of orchestration do you want to do. For example, are you looking for something more, modern and film driven? Then study John Williams. But if you're looking for something, that is maybe more romantic, then study Brahms. But as far as some practical advice to give you, the study of orchestration by Samuel Adler is probably as close as you're going to get to a holy book for orchestration. There are a lot of great books on orchestration, but this one, all of the great orchestrators that I know seem to point back to this book pretty consistently. And then I want to talk to you about some YouTube channels that I would actually recommend to help you learn orchestration. So the first channel that I want to recommend that you watch is Ryan Leach's. He has a ton of great composition breakdowns and a lot of really great orchestration breakdowns. The second channel I'm going to recommend to you is Alex Mukala's. His has a very much so a video game focus, but that's great. There's a lot of interesting things to learn, both compositionally and as far as orchestration goes from video game music. The next channel that I would recommend is Anne Catherine Derns. She's a media composer in Los Angeles, and she has such a great YouTube channel all about mock-ups and orchestration, and she has a ton of really, really cool videos. Again, another one that's very inspiring to me. And the final channel I'm going to recommend to you is Zach Heidi's, which is funny because he's, of course, has a video about why he stopped making composing tutorials, but his back catalog of tutorials is really interesting. And again, just watching the workflow and the videos and approaches from various composers is still useful to see how they think about orchestration and approach it. Our next question comes from Paint Much. I love watching song deconstructions. One thing I've noticed is how many of these sounds in music are actually really simple, but when layered together create a lot of uniqueness. Any tips on how to determine when to try and synthesize a complex sound from one synth patch versus trying to create a sound through layering? Orchestration is so tough. Keep up the great work, ZW. So the approach that I would encourage you to take is to think about the range of expression available to you within your instruments. And this is the key to orchestrating, whether you're using an actual orchestra or using a synthesizer. Think about a violin player, for example. There are many different ways that they can play their instrument. They can bow their instrument, they can pluck their instrument. And even within just bowing and plucking, there's a bunch of different techniques. With bowing, you can do smooth legato, you can do very fast spiccato bowing, you can do tremolos, you can do harmonics, right? And each of these afford a different color to the playing. And we want to think, particularly even when using synths, about that same approach. How are you designing and using your synths in a way that takes advantage of the full range of expression available to these instruments? And the answer to that usually is automation. So for example, let's say by the end of this 8 measures, I want this patch for the chords to really just open up. We're leading into something. Now your question is, do I need one complex sound or do I need to layer multiple sounds? And I think you need to use however many sounds gets you the result that you want, but you need to be using those sounds to the fullest of their possibilities. And that can be done with sounds that are simple or complex. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and open up automation here. We're going to start with just the filter, which is perhaps the simplest version of expression available to a synthesizer. So let's just crank this bad boy up all the way. Well, not all the way. Let's leave a little bit of room. So we're going to go from 127 hertz all the way to almost 8,000 hertz over the course of this 8 measures. We just had a gesture of opening occur. If we want more gestures to happen, we should look and see, are there any additional parameters that we can automate on our existing instrumentation to help us achieve that gesture? So I'm going to try cranking up the LFO amount and see, does this also increase the gesture? Let's just go all the way up to 30%. Adds more movement. I'm going to try to exhaust my options further. Now, this is all very simple. Straight line goes up pretty much for all of these, but compared to what it was at the start of this answer, this is going to feel so dramatic, like it's opening up and it's intense, and then we get this sharp cutoff right at the end, right? And we are using the tools available to us with this synthesizer to make it more expressive and to actually achieve the results that we want to achieve. So I'll play this, but to summarize, I would leave you with, think about what you're already using. Have you used the full range of expression available to you within it? If so, great. You've got probably the piece of music that you want. And then if not, seek other things out. Our next question comes from Big CNB. Each time I make music, it turns out completely different from my previous work. I struggle to commit to one genre and fear ending up decent at many things but great at none. Do you think it's better to master one genre or keep wandering wherever each beat takes me? So I empathize. I used to feel the exact same way about my own music, that it was all over the place and that there was no connecting thread, and it really frustrated me. Here's the thing that helped me. Anytime that I made an effect chain or even a preset for a device or my own instruments or anything like that, I would save it to my user library with the tag ZWB at the front of it. And now I go through, and whenever I want to start working on a track, I usually search up from a preset of mine first if I don't already have one in mind. And this helps for my music to have a consistent sound world, even if I'm working in different styles. And this just has completely transformed my relationship to my own music, and it's helped me think on a much deeper level about how my music sounds, even if I'm working in a different genre. And honestly, this starts to then gravitate me towards the areas that I want to be in, even if that's still a range of styles. So this is how I would actually approach your problem. It's how I fixed it for myself. Don't pigeonhole yourself in terms of genre, but start to just develop a library of your own sounds. And I think you're going to fall into the place that you should be and that you want to be. Thank you all so much for watching this month's episode of EQ&A. As always, if you have a music question that you'd like me to answer in next month's episode of EQ&A, reply to the pinned comment directly below this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing, liking, and leaving a comment. I'm working really hard to try to grow this channel to 15,000 subscribers by the end of 2025, and it's your support that makes it entirely possible. Till next time.